So today I want to talk about scanning the environment. So it's about looking into the future and using the skill of foresight to scan the environment to see what's possibly coming up in your future. And it's all based around my theme of disruption by design. Disruption and innovation are exactly the same thing. It's just disruption when it happens to you and it's innovation when you do it yourself. So we're going to talk about that today, and I'm going to take you through a series of exercises that I use with my clients when I help them with their strategic planning. We won't do them in detail because normally this is a half-day workshop, but I'll give you enough information, enough value today for you to practice them in this webcast and also then take them away and use them in your own businesses as well. So for people who don't know me, my name's Gihan Pereira. I'm a futurist, a conference speaker and author. I work with a lot of clients around Australia and New Zealand, the region, and even other parts of the world. And the interesting thing is that I work with a range of clients. You can see some of them here, and many of them are facing some of the same issues when it comes to strategic planning and thinking ahead for their future. So we're going to cover some of them today. I've also published my book, Disruption by Design, recently, and the subtitle of the book is Leading the Change in a Fast-Changing World, because our world is changing really quickly now, and it's up to us as leaders, business owners, entrepreneurs, to be able to lead that change rather than just sit around waiting for it to happen and then wonder what happened. So this is all about leading the change. It's about innovating from the inside out, and that's what I mean by disruption by design. If you'd like to get a copy of the book, it is available from our website, but don't go there, because if you wait till the end of this webcast, when the exit survey pops up, if you complete the exit survey, I'll send you a downloadable full PDF copy of the book at the end of this webcast. Okay, so let me give you the big picture around how the world has changed and what that means for us in a lot of our businesses and organizations. So we know the world is changing faster than ever before. Everybody says that, but let me tell you what's happened in terms of business growth. See, most businesses, most organizations go through 3 phases of growth. In the first phase, what you do is you or whoever started the business organization sees that there's customers out there with problems. And so they build a business and they hire the people who can solve those problems. So we've got these black squares, which are the customers with their problems, and you start your business, you work really hard, you strive, you succeed because you're a good fit for solving those customer problems. Then what happens is the world changes a bit, and many organizations don't adapt to that. So you've still got some customers with those same problems. So you can survive, but it's a bit of a struggle now, because now you've got people who not only have these black square problems, but now they've got these white circle problems. And if your business hasn't changed, hasn't adapted, and you're still trying to solve those old problems for those old style of customer, then you'll struggle to survive. And so many businesses come to this point where they are now slowing down. And the ones that thrive are the ones who recognize that there are new customers out there with a different problem set, and they want different solutions. And the solutions might be very, very different from what they had, what you provided before. And so this is why startup businesses do very well, because they don't have the legacy, they don't have the established infrastructure, the resources, the assets, all of the history of established businesses. So they look around and they say, who are the customers, what are their problems, and how do we find solutions for them? And they pick up what's out there. Many organizations don't do that, so they don't thrive. So this is the challenge for us now. And these 3 growth phases have always been the case in businesses and organizations. It's just that now all of that is happening faster than ever before. In the past, it was possible to build a whole business, a whole career, a whole lifetime working in an organization that solved the same problems for customers because the customers didn't change. And the problems they had didn't change. So you could build a business, you could fortify your business by leading market share, by setting up strong supply chains, by building a reputation, and that would last you. In fact, it would increase your competitive edge, but that's not the case anymore. So this is, if you want to be one of those organizations that thrives, you need these 3 things. You need foresight, which is a skill to look into the future, to see what problems customers have now and what your future customers are like. Then you need this, obviously you need the talent. So you need the people in your organization and the people around it who can help you solve those problems. And then you need to be able to take action in this fast changing world. And those are the 3 parts of my book, Disruption by Design. Is all about foresight, talent, and action. So part one's about foresight, and that's the one we're going to look at today. So I'm very big on also looking at talent, but we won't cover that in today's webcast. We'll look at the skill of foresight, which is looking into the future to understand what's out there and how is that going to help us solve our customers' problems now. So broadly, I'm going to go through three things here, I'm not going to give them equal time. So first of all, we're going to scan wide, so looking into the future to see what external pressures there might be on our organization. And then we'll look at narrowing down. So I'll look at this very briefly because this is a really important part of your strategic planning, but we won't do it. I'll give you enough for you to be able to take it away and use, but we won't do a lot of that in today's webcast. And then I'll give you the chance to build in. So narrowing down means choosing the things that are going to have the biggest impact on you or that you can leverage to have the biggest impact on your business. And the third one is build it in to your current business. A lot of this is around decision making. So to get started, before we get into these three areas, let me look at decision making. So I'm going to ask you, for yourself, or for your team, or for your organization, what's your decision-making culture? And the reason I'm saying you, your team, or your organization is because it depends at what level you are. If you're a senior leader or a business owner, you might be able to answer this question for your organization. If you're a team leader, you may be able to answer it for your team. And I reckon you should also be thinking about answering it for yourself as well. So what I mean by this is most decision-making falls broadly into one of four categories. So I'll tell you what the four categories are, and then we'll run a little poll where you can say where you fit. So the first one is the culture or the people in the team who are resistant. So they see change around them, and they're resistant to it. So it's like this: hear no evil, see no evil, do no evil, speak no evil. They don't want to know. They don't want to know. They're not going to make any change happen. They're the ones who are going to wait around for change to happen. In fact, they're hoping that somebody else is going to be able to counter that change so that they don't have to change. They themselves don't have to change. So that's the first one, the resistant kind of culture or that kind of thinking towards change. And the second one here is where they jump in too quickly. So they're impulsive. So is your decision making or your team's decision making impulsive, where you rush into things, think without giving them due thought and due consideration? So a fast decision is not always a good decision. It's not always a well-considered decision. The third kind is the opposite of impulsive. It's where you don't make a decision because you just wait and wait and wait, and you get more and more information because you're so hesitant to make the wrong decision that you're just waiting to get as much information as you can to make the right decision. And by that time, of course, it's too late. The world's moved on past you. In academia, there's a thing called the PhD syndrome, where a PhD candidate writing up their thesis never publishes because there's always one bit of extra research they can do. There's always one new paper to review. There's always one little tiny thing that they could add to make it perfect. So they have to be pushed into publishing. So that's a kind of hesitant decision making. It happens in a lot of organizations as well. So the fourth one is a very good one. And the fourth one is the decisive culture. And when you're thinking about change, it's saying that you get enough information to be able to make a decision, and then you make a decision, and then you move on from that. And that decision isn't hard and fast, it's not set in stone, but you make the decision, move on, evaluate, and then decide whether you need to do something different later on. Okay, so what is your organization's decision-making style? And you could say, this is what is your decision-making style. I don't mind which way you answer this question. Let me run it as a poll here. So I'll launch the poll for people who are new to the polling system. It's very easy. Just answer, it's multiple choice. Just answer one of these broadly as what's your organization's decision-making style. And many people, you'd say that sometimes we're one, sometimes we're the other. So just choose one of them. Okay, thank you for voting quickly. Great. Okay, so most people have voted. So let me stop the poll and share the results for you so you can see what people have said. Yes, it's interesting. So when I run this poll, usually most people, and I run this with different groups, most people fall into the two middle categories, which is the case here as well. And it's interesting in this group, more people are saying that they're their style or their organization style is more hesitant rather than impulsive. I've been in other groups where most people say we're too impulsive. But so impulsive means that you make a decision without the right information. Hesitant means you get more and more information and you don't make a decision. So neither of them is good, but both of them, you need to fix one thing. So if you're impulsive, it means gather more information before you make a decision. Don't rush in. And hesitant, it means make a decision sooner because you've probably got all the information that you need. Okay, so that's useful. So let's continue with. I want to show you something that Accenture did this research, and they are CEOs, Australian CEOs. So this is an Australian piece of research where their biggest competition will come from in the next 3 years, and they had them under 4 categories. So let me run this as a poll before I share the results. So where do you think your biggest competition will come from in the next 3 years in one of these 4 categories? Okay, so let me launch this poll here. So do you think that your biggest competition is going to come from existing competitors? Is it going to come from existing organizations but outside your industry? And then the same for startups. Is it startups who are going to start up in the industry or startups outside? And I'll show you what the Accenture results said as soon as after we answer the polls. Let's see. Okay, so we're getting up to about 50% of people have voted. When I get to about 80, then I'll stop the poll. Okay, good. We're getting there. Excellent. Okay, so let me share the results. Okay, good. So I'm really pleased to see this, that here most people are saying that the existing competition are important, but by far the more important are going to be the people who are outside your industry and also companies that don't even exist now. And this is really interesting. And I know that this is a little bit self-selecting because you came to this webcast because you probably thought that already. You probably thought there's some things that could affect you from outside your industry and from companies that don't even exist yet. But when Accenture asked the Australian CEOs this question in their survey, what they said was that, by the way, you can get this report, so I won't go into it in a lot of detail, but you can download the Accenture Technology Vision report, and they asked CEOs, where do you think the biggest threats are in the next 3 years? And they were kind of spread across all 4, but by far the biggest were these first 2. In fact, let me show you all 4 of them. So the biggest one was that businesses thought, the CEOs thought that their biggest competition is going to come from existing competition. And I think that's very dangerous thinking. And only very few of them, like fewer than 1 in 5, thought that they come from completely outside the industry, from companies that didn't even exist now. And I think it's risky. If you think that if you look at these first 2, so 50% plus said that the competition is going to come from companies that already exist, that are already out there. Yeah, and I feel sorry for the CEOs, especially the ones who fall into that first category, because that's just not the way the world works now. So it's really pleasing to see that there are many people who think that there's going to be some competition from outside their industry, which is the second and fourth option, and even from startup companies, so businesses that don't even exist now. Okay, so with that as a preview and as a bit of perspective around what we're going to talk about, let's look at this first area. So this first area is looking at external pressures that could affect your business and your industry. And we're going to spend most of our time in this remaining half hour looking at this area here. It says looking at the external pressures in your business. When I come in and do this as a strategic planning workshop for clients, this is what I do. This is my pre-work. So I come into an organization and I've done the research into what might affect their industry, and I bring that into the senior leadership team, because many of them, of course, they need to know that, but they don't have time to do that because they've got other priorities. So that's the value that I bring in to the strategic planning. We're going to do that here as an exercise for you. Tolkien, in the book The Hobbit, he said this, which applies perfectly to this process that we're just about to do. He says if there's a live dragon living somewhere near you, it's a pretty good idea to use him when you're doing any of your planning, when you're going outside. Okay, so that's what we're going to do here. We're going to look for the live dragons that might be affecting your business and your industry. So we're going to do this using a process called PESTEL analysis. Now, some of you may have seen this before. You may have seen it called step analysis if it was some years ago, or steep analysis, which is the more recent version, but it's now PESTEL. And PESTEL is an acronym, so it's just got these 6 letters now. So if you hear anyone talking about steep analysis or step analysis, just tell them, oh, by the way, did you know it's called PESTEL now? You're behind the times. So here's how it works. And it's simply a nice, easy tool to focus our brainstorming efforts. So all we're going to do is look at external pressures in these 6 areas. So political pressures, environmental pressures, social pressures, technological, which is the one that many people think about to, unfortunately, at the expense of others, and it shouldn't be, legal, and economic. So previously it was called steep, and now they've added legal in there, and now we've added legal in there as well. Rearrange the letters is called PESTEL. So they're not in any particular order. They're only in that order now because it makes a nice word. But the idea is that you do some thinking around these external pressures that could affect your future, because we're all on a one-way trip into the future, and we've got to figure out what we're going to face. Many organizations wait until they get there, and then they look around. What we can do is do a little bit of forward planning and forward thinking. So here are the 6 again. So political is what are the political pressures? So things like governments changing, in the UK, things like Brexit and so on. Environmental is about sustainability. It's about climate change. It's about people wanting to work with organizations that take a strong environmental stance. Social is obviously about people. It's about demographics. It's about generations. It's about the fact that people are now all on mobile phones and connected, and some of the changes that are happening around that. Technological is obviously all around the technology. And again, as I said, sometimes people place too much emphasis on that, but you shouldn't. Legal doesn't only have to be about law, but it could also be about regulations. It could be about things like currency. So are we going to use the fiat currencies we use now, or is everyone going to start using Bitcoin, for example? I think the answer to that's no, but they're the sort of things that might come under legal or economic. So economic is what happens if you go into a bust, what happens if you have a boom, what happens if economic conditions change and more people move out from rural areas into cities, those sort of things. And don't get too hung up on whether something fits into, like political, legal, economic. Some things might fit under any one of those 3 categories. That's not important. The idea is simply to use this as a tool to help us and to prompt us with our brainstorming. Okay, so we're actually going to do this here. So we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. Obviously, when I go into an organization, it's one organization, so I work with them and their leaders on their business and their industry. With a webcast like this, we've got lots of people on the webcast from different businesses, different industries. So we're going to do a case study. But before we do that, let me just quickly check in and see if anyone's got any questions about what any of those 6 things means before we go into do the case study. Okay, so if you've got questions, just type them in the question box, as people have been doing when they said hello at the start, but they hadn't been, so I'll just continue. And if it's a bit vague at the moment, don't worry, you'll get the chance when we do this example. Okay, so for the case study, what we're going to do is one of 3 potential businesses. So what we're going to do is pretend that we're either the senior leadership team of a private hospital, a major airport, or a local council. And I picked these 3 examples because they are clients that I've worked with in the last 6 to 12 months on exactly this. So in fact, we're not going to do private hospital because I've done that. I did that recently with another group. So let's pick one of the other 2. So I'd like you, I won't run this as a poll, but I'd like you in the question box to type in either airport or council, depending on which one you would like to use as the case study for this. And then what we're going to do is pretend that we're senior leaders in that organization. So I can see first votes coming for council, and I'm just going to give people the chance to vote. Okay, so I think we've got enough representation now to say council is a one. Okay, so here's how it works. So we are all going to assume that we are senior leaders in a local council. So we're not councillors, we're working for local government. And we, obviously, as you know, like the local councils, they're very close to their constituents. They're closer than state or federal level, but local councils deal with people all the time. By the way, I think, is putting on my futurist hat, I think in the future, cities or local councils are going to be more important than countries. So at the moment, everything's based around countries, but I think there's going to be a big shift towards cities or councils, and cities can be like local governments within cities, because you're really close to where change is happening and where people can make that change. So I think that's going to be a shift in the future. I've done a lot of work with local councils in the recent past because they recognize that they want to be looking ahead of the future. I worked with one recently where we did this kind of strategic planning, and I said to them, how far ahead do you want to look? Do you want to look 3, 5, wherever? And they said, no, we've already done our 3 to 5 year planning. We want to know what this city, this local council is going to look like in 10 to 15 years time. So they're looking ahead that far. So here's how we're going to do it. So we're going to do this PESTEL analysis. And the way we're going to do it is we'll use this tool that I've used before in some of my webcasts, which is an online bulletin board. So here's how it works. So we've got these 6 areas: political, environmental, social, which is around people, technological, around technology, rules and regulations, and the economy. And if you can now go to askgihan.com in your web browser. Okay, so if you go to askgihan.com, what you get is this blank bulletin board. So let me do that myself and I'll show it to you. So I've just leave that up for a couple more seconds so you've got the time to see askgihan.com. All right, let me switch over. Okay, and what you see is these 6 columns. There should be 6 of them there. Good. Okay, so there are the 6. So political, environmental, social, technological, legal, economic. Okay, so here's how it works. So, for example, if I say I've got an idea around some social impact that's going to affect in the future the way that local councils work, I'm going to click this plus button and I'm going to say you don't have to put your name, just put in what the impact will be. So a social impact that's going to affect it is mobile phones used to report issues to council. Okay. Right, so that's it. So that's what we do. So we just pick any one of the areas and add as many as you want to. And then, but don't worry about the rate column yet. We'll do that later, the rate for each item. We'll do that in the next step. But let's see what we come up with. Okay, let me add another one. Okay, let me add another one for you. Under political, the one that I mentioned earlier, cities become independent international entities. So in other words, instead of dealing with Australia, other cities, so instead of the UK dealing with Australia, it could be that London deals with Perth or with Adelaide. Okay, let's see. Good, excellent. Real-time reporting, so around social, yeah, good. Okay, let me add another one. Generation Z only wants to work. organizations. Okay, good. I'm going to keep this going for a few more minutes. Okay, and here's an example, by the way, Gen Z with zero waste. That could go under environmental or social. Doesn't really matter. I don't mind which one, because that's not the point. We're not trying to classify them exactly. We're just using this to get ideas. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, I'll take another one. Smart homes. Okay, so we have older people living longer at home. So we're going from, in other words, shift from residential aged care to community-based aged care. So I did a lot of work with aged care, and that's one of the issues that they're facing at the moment as well. Oops. Okay, this is great, fantastic. So we've got enough now to work with. And now, if I do this with an organization, as I said, what I do is I do the initial research for them and identify some of the things that might affect their business, their industry. If you engage me to work with you, then I'll do that for you. But if you don't, then use this exercise within your organization as well. Any questions about the exercise that we're doing here? Because this is pretty much it at this stage. All we're doing is we're just doing brainstorming, and the 6 categories just give us some ideas around each of them. Now, it's great also with this group here that most people aren't from a local council, so they actually bring in that external perspective, which you often don't get when you're working within an organization, which is why people bring me in, because I can bring that external perspective and that diversity. But also, just keep that in mind when you're doing this exercise. Don't just do it with the usual suspects. So don't just do it with your main leadership team. You may choose to do it with bringing in some of your younger or more recent graduates as well into the process. Because they will have different ideas. Okay, so we're not going to do any more with that. We'll come back to that when we come to this second stage here. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this narrow down stage, even though it is a really, really important part of the process. I just want to explain the process to you so that you can then implement it yourself at work. In fact, when I run this workshop, we spend a lot of time in this narrow down phase. And basically what we're doing is something called scenario planning. So scenario planning is something that was started at Shell a generation ago. So Shell put a few people aside into a team and said, tell us what's going to happen in the future. And so they went in and they did a whole bunch of scenarios. They thought about various scenarios. So what happens if OPEC reduces the demand of oil? What happens if there's war in the Middle East? What happens if Jimmy Carter becomes president? So those are sort of scenarios that they identified. And then they came to Shell management and said, here's a list of scenarios. And the management said, great, which one's going to happen? And they said, well, no, that's not the way it works. The way it works is here are different scenarios that you need to keep in mind. And they assigned various probabilities to them happening. But they said you need to be able to change depending on the scenarios. So we're going to now go back to our list and classify them according to these 4 categories. So the 2 axes here, is this in the near term? So it's imminent or maybe already happening, or is it in the long term? So it's far away. It doesn't say whether it's plausible or not. The second category, the second axis, is whether it's plausible. So is there strong evidence for it, or is there only weak evidence? Okay, so let's look at these 4 categories. So the first one is the one that you can pretty much ignore for now. There's a lot of hype around it, so it's weak evidence, and it's in the long term. So we can ignore it for now. So Elon Musk says, we're going to go to Mars, we're going to colonize Mars. We know that there's not much evidence for it because nobody else has done that yet. And it's a long time in the future. And we also know that Elon Musk talks a good talk, but we need to see that happening in reality first. So we can ignore that for now. The second one is where there's a lot of hype around it, but if it happens, it could happen very quickly. So in my opinion, blockchain falls into this category, that there's a lot of talk around blockchain, but actually, like I'm a software developer from way back. The technology behind blockchain we've had for a long, long time. It just hasn't had the sexy name blockchain around it. But if everyone suddenly starts adopting it, then it could make a difference, and it could have a significant impact on many industries. I just don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen because of the technology. It could happen because everyone suddenly decides it's a great idea and will do it. But they could have done that 20 years ago. They just haven't yet. So we should keep that on our radar. We should stay alert to it. The third one, which is our second priority, is the scenarios that are in the long term, but there's pretty strong evidence for them, like self-driving cars, for example. They're already working. There are already examples of them driving around with other drivers on the road. And so in the US, Lyft, which is the competitor Uber, they have a huge number of self-driving cars driving around the roads. Now, they still have safety drivers in the driver's seat, but they basically don't have to do anything because the car kind of drives itself. So we know this is already happening, but it's put in far term because it'll take a while before that becomes mainstream, because there's a lot of infrastructure and social issues to get over before that happens. But we know there's strong evidence for it, so it should inform our strategy. So as a local council, with our local government hat on, we should be thinking about what's going to be the impact when we have self-driving cars on our roads, first of all, with human drivers, and then secondly, what happens if we don't have any human drivers on the road and we only have self-driving cars. And there are things to think about there. So, maybe all our roads will be automatically charging the cars as they drive along them. So one city in China is already doing that. It's designed only for self-driving cars, and the roads themselves charge the cars as they're driving. So strong evidence for it. And then the last one is the stuff that you should act on now. You should drive our actions because it's near, or it's maybe even already happening, and there's strong evidence for it. Okay, so if we were to go back to our list of ideas, what I'd like you to do now is very quickly just go through and rate some of them. So let me show this again. Okay, so let me pick one that I said. So cities become independent international entities. Okay, so you've got the chance to rate it, and I'd say, so what you're looking for, oops, sorry, I should tell you how to rate it. Let me go back for this. What we're looking for are the things that are above the line. So we're looking for the things that are that there's strong evidence for, and give it a high rating, like a 4 or 5 if there's evidence for it, which is strong, and it's near term. Give it a 2 or a 3 if it's longer term, but there's still strong evidence for it. And if you think it's below the line, so it's mostly hype, then don't give it any rating at all. Okay, so let me go back to that. So this is your opinion. Okay, so I reckon this idea of cities becoming independent international entities, yeah, I think that's long term, so I'm not going to give it a high rating. In fact, I'll just give it a rating of 1. Okay, and that's it. That's my rating. So you go ahead and do some of these for some of the others. So and I'll have a look at some of these as well. Council and cities more important than state government. Mega councils. Okay, I reckon mega councils. And that's already happening. So I reckon that could be something to keep in mind. Smart homes. I think that's already happening. So that's pretty high. Flying cars, I'm not going to rate it all because I think that, although there's some evidence for that. So Singapore is starting their first flying cars trial later this year. So it's not completely hype, but it's still long term. So I'll give it a rating of 1. A reduced number of employees using AI, I think that's reasonably high probability, and that's already happening. So we can, so for example, Amazon has got lots of robots doing work that humans would do, and not only manual work, but robotic software doing some of that work. Okay, I'll just leave it open for a couple more minutes while we're answering questions. So artificial intelligence to answer ratepayer questions. I think you're referring to chatbots, absolutely. So I think that if I'm rating that one, I'd say that's very high because it's already happening, and there's evidence of that in other areas other than local government. So yep, there's definitely the evidence for that. So we should definitely include that one. Okay, great. So you can see the process here. So we're not going to wait till everything's rated. Let's move on to that third area, but you can see how the process works. So what you're looking for are things that, as I said, are above the line that you're then going to include in your strategy. So when I do this in workshops, what I get people to do, if I get them to do their brainstorming at the start, the PESTEL analysis, I then get them to write each thing on a little post-it note, and then they stick them on flip chart paper in these 4 categories. So the things above the line are the things that you should use in terms of your short-term strategy and your medium or long-term strategy. The things below the line are the things that you don't need to think about just yet. However, I find that often people don't have very many things below the line, and I think that's a little bit of a mistake. I think that you should be thinking about things that are hype before you decide to put them below the line. So I often find when people do this with their flip charts, that the top half of the flip chart has lots of post-it notes on it, and the bottom half doesn't have very many at all, except for the ones that I bring in and that I suggest for them, because I'm looking at the hype things as well as the strong evidence, because I want to consider them before you decide to ignore them. And you should ignore them if they're purely hype. You don't want to spend a lot of time on them, but also don't limit your thinking that you filter them out too soon. Okay, so the third area, which is building it into your organization. Again, we won't spend a lot of time on this, but I'll explain how it works. So what you're looking for here is taking any one of those ideas and then deciding how it's going to be used, or how you can use it in your organization. So you're assessing the action that you can take. So now you've decided that you've rated it high, and now you're going to decide how you're going to use it. And there are 4 ways that you can use it. It can either replace what you're already doing, and I suggest you don't start off that way. So don't say, oh, this means I'm going to lose my job. But then look at the other 3. So how can it assist you to do your job better? So for example, we've seen examples like AI, which can help you do your job, not necessarily replace employees. How can it elevate what you do? So it actually removes something which was routine or procedural or drudgery but takes up a lot of time and lets you do a better job. For example, in my own business, we're using outsourcing now. So my business manager, Emma, and we're the only 2 people in the business, and we're just about to employ a VA, a virtual assistant in the Philippines. Now that's going to be she's going to be Emma's virtual assistant, so that Emma can then do other roles. She can be elevated to other roles rather than the pure administrative work which somebody else can do remotely. So that's an example of using outsourcing to elevate somebody's performance rather than to replace them. And the last one is, how can this completely transform the way that your business or your industry operates? So this is where you say, if I was going to put myself out of business, what would I do? And quite often in these groups, when I run this workshop, this is exactly the question I ask. If you're going to put yourself out of business, how would you do it? And not by the traditional way with the existing competitors, but by taking one of these ideas that have come up through the PESTEL analysis. Okay, so let me give you one quick example to show you how that might work. And I'll ask you to share some ideas in the question box as well. Okay, so for example, so let's look at things that have been rated highly. I can see some of mine, but okay, so traffic-free zones, that got a rating of 4. Okay, so traffic-free zones, in fact, I would rate that highly as well. I didn't see that one earlier. So how are we going to, so if that's coming up in the future, how are we going to integrate that into the way that we operate as a local government, as a local council? So is it going to be assisting us? Possibly. Is it going to be elevating what we can do? So this elevating what we do as a council, or is it going to completely transform the way that a council operates or that we run? So it's probably not going to transform, but I can certainly see it could assist or elevate. Artificial, let me pick another one here, technology, AI to answer ratepayer questions. This is definitely an opportunity to elevate what you're doing, because if you don't need humans to be on the phones or staffing email responses, and AI can do that, then it certainly elevates the roles that the people have, so they can spend time doing higher order work. Yeah, so this one here, reduce the number of employees using AI. So the actual external pressure is that we're going to have AI. AI is going to reduce costs. Absolutely right. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to reduce the number of employees. It could mean that the employees are doing something different. So that's an example of elevate. Okay, so again, I don't want to go through this in detail. It doesn't make sense to do that in this webcast anyway, because this is not your business, your organization. I just want to give you an example of how it works in practice. And this is what I do when I do this with clients. So we talked about these three things. We talked about scanning wide, talked about narrowing down, and then building it in to your organization. I do, as I said, I do run this workshop with clients. They bring me in to speak to their senior leaders and their management teams. And what we do is those three things. So I do the scanning wide for them. I do let's look at the external pressures. And then in the workshop, in the half day that we have together, we do the scenario planning. And then we do that integration process, which is building it into the organization. So just one last thing before we finish up. I've got one little puzzle for you, which is looking at how we're going in the future. If you're interested in this workshop, please get in touch with me. As I said, I've worked with clients in lots of different industries around Australia, and it's a really valuable use of half a day of their time to look outside and then narrow it down to what can actually be used in their organization in the future. So here's a little puzzle. This is a puzzle that I saw first as a kid, so you may have seen it as well. And if you have, then no problem. No problem, you get the answer straight away, but that's okay, because I've got a point that I want to make with it. So here's this lily pad. So it's this big pond which has got lilies in it. In fact, it only has one lily in the pond, but the number of lilies doubles every day. So on day one, there's one, then the second day, there's two, then the third day, there's 4, and then 8 and 16, and so on. The pond fills in 30 days. So when was a pond half full? Okay, so just type it in the question box if you think you know the answer. So it fills in 30 days. When is it half full? Let's see who gets the answer first. Okay, don't see any answers yet. Interesting. Yes, Julianne, yes. So it is half full on day 29. Okay, so many people say it's, and I can see other people saying that as well. Now, great. Yes, so many people say, of course, that the obvious quick answer is 15 days, but it is 29 days. So here's how it works, right? So on day 30, okay, and someone says that's pretty obvious. Yeah, and to some people it is. So I was speaking to a group of accountants. I was doing this process for a group of accountants recently, and they all immediately they yelled out 29 days. And then the facilitators who brought me in, they were doing a 2-day strategic retreat. They're going, oh, hold on. For the 2 non-accountants in the room, can you explain why? So here's how it works, right? On day 30, it's 100% full. On day 29, the day before that, it's half full, 50%. But that's not my point, right? You can take that and you can entertain your family and friends with that puzzle. But here's a real point. If we go back a week, so let's go back to the day before that, on day 28, it was only a quarter full. 27, it was 1/8 full. And then we go back right to the start of the week. So on day 24, at the start of that week, it was only 1% full. And remember, that's 24 days into 30. So the first 3 weeks before that was even less than 1%. So the point I'm making is that even at the start of that last week, the pond looks almost empty. It's almost empty. And you could be at that point where you say, oh, it's only 1% of our customers who are who are demanding an app-based solution. It's only 1% of our top talent that we're losing. It's only 1% that our market share has gone down. It's only 1% of anything. Okay, but because we've got this exponential growth now, that 1% is very rapidly going to get into this 100%. And many organizations, many leaders don't recognize that when they're at 1%, they're at the start of this very steep growth curve. And this hasn't always been the case. It's only happening now because things are growing exponentially. So it's not just technology. So technology, there's that old Moore's law that technology doubles every 18 months or so, but it's happening with people as well because we're all connected and networks are exponential. So just be aware and just be careful that you don't ignore things just because they're that 1%. So, as I said, again, a reminder, if you complete the exit survey at the end of this webcast, which is now, then you'll get a copy of my Disruption by Design book where I go through the 3 exercises that we did today, plus there's 47 other models and exercises to help you be fit for the future. So thank you everyone for coming along. As I said, if you want to find out more about the workshop, please get in touch. We'd love to work with you. Otherwise, hope you got some value that you can use in this webcast for your own organization. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.